Good morning, Deirdre.
Good morning, Tom. How are you today, sitting in the Grand Canyon there?
I'm sitting in the Grand Canyon at sunset, actually. So it's not morning, right?
Right,
Because the sun should be on the other side if it were morning,
right.
because I'm on the south rim. But it is beautiful colors, that's for sure.
Yes, it is.
This is different than fall in the east, which we experienced yesterday. So this is the second part of the beginning of the series of navigating the now. And that's about how do you as a leader build a business in today's context, which is meaning a cycle time of what are we doing today or what are we doing tomorrow as opposed to what are we doing in 6 months or 12 months, right? We've got plenty of time to cover those things and plenty of things we've already done about those. But what you and I are seeing is that uh, what we're seeing in the world today is a cycle time of almost everything that is shrinking, and the that puts an element of change into the day-to-day flow of what's going on. That's very hard to predict even what you're going to do a week from now.
Yes.
Um, and you can have an idea of where you want to go, but it's then having to maneuver your way through. So what we've done is spent a fair amount of time thinking about how can we help give leaders who are trying to build a business, not trying to build, but are building businesses under these conditions, good or bad, right? We're all trying to build a business. And as we build these businesses or build our careers or improve our capabilities, how do you work your way through this? And that's the purpose of what we're doing. We have already recorded one session yesterday where you and I talked through assessing the situation, seeing what is in front of us, and having a very short framework of what we call the three questions that are: what am I missing about the situation? How are the motivations aligned or not aligned um, in the people that I'm dealing with, or the things I'm dealing with? And it could be a person dealing with an AI model, right? That might be hard to figure out what the motivation is of that
Right,
alignment. So it's not just people. And then the third question is, how much time do I have?
right.
What is the time element involved here? So that's the first framework that we called assessing the situation. The second one is the topic for today, Deirdre. It's the decision you make. So how do I decide? Now I have a sense of the situation. How do I decide? And this is, what am I going to do? And that what am I going to do, you can shorten to what's the approach that I'm going to take. So I have to decide not only what I'm going to do, but also the approach. And combined, that's a plan, right?
Right.
A plan of action. So we have a short framework for that.
Yes.
And there are three elements to it. One is, what resources do you have? Number two, what outcome do you expect to achieve?
Hmm.
And number three, what is that plan to achieve what your outcome is?
Right.
So we're going to explore this topic. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to you for a second and let you elaborate on this process and start us down that path.
Very well. Remember that decide is the second part of our organizing structure here. We have the assess and we have decide. So that everything that we said yesterday in terms of assess now comes into play in terms of decide. So yesterday we had our leader. We discussed the mindset that this leader has, the development of ongoing development of the knowledge and capabilities and the development of understanding in this leader, keeping up with things in the industry and the marketplace so that this person is prepared to assess what's going on and then, of course, to make the decisions. So we have someone who has now come to the whole organizing structure with a mindset, has gone through the process of assessment, understanding what they're missing, what the motivations are of all of the players in this whole situation, and then what's the time factor involved. And I'm going to bring in a couple of other terms that we use. You use the word approach. We use the term strategy sometimes, strategy and approach as synonyms. One of the things that a leader does when making an assessment is to set what you call the game. What's going on in the marketplace here? Who are the players in the game? What are the moves that are being made in this game by all of the different players? And then what moves is this leader going to have to make to do a successful strategy, a successful approach to accomplish what the leader wants to accomplish? And when you start to think of a game going on here within the context of all of the knowledge and understanding that the leader has of the marketplace, you start to understand the first thing that we talk about. What resources does this leader have? Or alternatively, what resources can this leader get quickly to bring to play? Quickly being a very important term here. You know, sometimes leaders say, well, I don't have anyone who understands quantum computing, but next year I'll bring, no, it's not next year. First of all, there may not be the people next year, quantum computing specialists being so rare, but you have to make the decision very quickly. So what resources do you have now? That's what enables you to put your assessment into action. That's another way to phrase it. Or what resources can you get within the time frame, which could be an hour, a day, or so forth, to make your assessment, turn your assessment into action. And then you have to think through, okay, now that I know that, what outcome do I want here? What do I actually want to accomplish in this game going on? Not only what do I want to accomplish, but what is it feasible for me to want to accomplish? And this is where time again becomes such a factor. And I'm going to take this one step further before turning it back to you. One of the things we discussed yesterday was the movement of these leaders and the whole company from the industrial age into the digital age. And it's in the digital age where time becomes such a factor. Now, you and I have read a lot of books written by industrial age people, and we love some of these authors. One of our favorite authors is Peter Drucker. And we believe that Peter Drucker, well, a lot of what Peter Drucker has to say has tremendous importance in the digital age. And we've talked about that in the past, and we'll talk about it again. But just to set some of the framework of what we're talking about in our digital age organization structure, I want to just quickly go through Peter Drucker's process for making decisions. Drucker talks about decisions as being extremely important. They're not just these gut reactions to things, and far too many leaders make decisions as pure gut reactions. You don't have that luxury, whether in the industrial age or the digital age, and I'll come back to that in a second. But leaders, according to Drucker, have to recognize that a problem needs to be solved because it's a strategic problem. You don't make decisions quickly, you make them because they're strategic. Then you have to understand the specs that your solution to the problem need to satisfy. So not only do you have to understand that the problem is strategic, you have to understand what's involved in satisfying that strategic problem. Then you have to take a step back and decide what's right. What's the right outcome that I need here for this to be a good decision? Then what you have to do is you have to build action into a decision. As Drucker says very, very clearly, and he's not a man who suffers weaknesses, let's put it that way. What he says is a decision is only a good intention unless you build action into the decision. So we're not talking about leaders wasting time stating good intentions here. We're talking about them coming up with solutions that they can build into actions immediately. And then you have to test the validity and effectiveness of this. Now, Drucker actually gives examples where leaders took months to get this process right. And that might have been possible in the industrial age. In the digital age, what you and I have just been talking about is leaders going through everything here within an hour, within a day at most, and so forth. That you have to understand the problem, understand its strategic importance immediately. That you have to understand what specs are required to solve this problem immediately. That you have to understand what's right for your company in this game being played immediately. And then you have to identify the outcomes you want. And then you have to build a plan very, very quickly. So, what we're talking about here is the acceleration of what one of the all-time thinkers about this sort of thing says could be a long process, and converting that into a time-effective process for leaders in the digital age. And now I'm going to stop and take a breath and turn this back over to you.
All right. Yes, exactly. There. That's where we really are, is that we love detail. We do. You and I love detail. We
Yes.
are detail people. We are probably, I suffer a little bit more of this, which I don't think is a good thing, of perfectionism than you do, although you have a good
I have a
sized
big
quotient. You have
stick.
to, I think I'm a little worse, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
That's just because you're more correct than I am, Deirdre. It takes me longer to get to the answer. And by the way, everybody that knows the two of us knows that's actually fact that I've just stated there. But one of the things you've said that is really powerful is that what we're trying to get across, the people we're talking with here today, they know this.
Yes.
Problem is, it's that we haven't lived it very often, right? Some of us have lived it because of jobs we've done in the past, or things we've done in the past, where your whole ethos was one of having to make quick decisions and doing what you're doing. And the best example of that, I was not a first responder in the classic sense, but they have to think that way. And unless you've had some training in that kind of work, and
Yes.
you don't, it doesn't come easily to most of us, because most of us, we really do want to do things and do them well. And so we tend to want to do them and take the time that it's going to take to do it.
Right.
And so the thing that we are just we're focusing on is the fact that it has become clear to us, and actually to most of the people we deal with, that the cycle time of everything we're dealing with is shrinking. And
Yes.
there's a reason why we went through that in a fair amount of detail yesterday, that
Yes.
has fundamentally to do with the technology platform that we're now functioning on. And that platform continues to increase in its cycle time, and that has an undercurrent to it
Right.
that drives us all to increasing speed. So that leaders like us, we have to think about, how do you react to this? And for a long time, we had the benefit of experience to deal with, so that during a career, you dealt with these things so much, and you had the context of the institution and the institutional knowledge and the experience you could gain from the institution. The fact that you actually were standing or sitting or working beside somebody in the office 5 days a week or longer, um, and that we gained the benefit of that.
Right.
The fact is, and again, for those of you that don't know us well, we don't try to make a judgment about any of this being good or bad. Right? We're just saying this is what it is, and
Right.
try to be as clear and to say, how do you deal with it? That we're facing a situation, and this happened in a major change during the COVID period that we went through as a globe almost globally, where it shifted to people working remotely.
Right.
And there's all kinds of efforts to now to recover from that and go back to what was. And you and I have, unfortunately, we've lived long enough, Deirdre, to know that you don't go backwards, right? As much as many people would love to go backwards, you do
Right.
not go backwards, right? And we actually know that because we know the whole universe functions that way. It's not going backwards; it keeps going out to
Right.
an endpoint that we can't envision easily. There are people that can, but you're going forward. And so it's a matter of how do you adapt to this? Well, what this is meaning is it's much harder for people today with an increasing cycle time, lack of a focus on institutions and the education the institutions are providing, the lack of institutional knowledge that's in there and easy to pick up because we're physically close to somebody working for periods of time, long periods of time through many different situations.
Right.
And the fact that our work environment has moved, it's causing us to not, those of us that have not had that experience, haven't had the benefit of that, we don't have an easy way to learn to deal with it.
Right.
And so that's part of what we're talking about is developing that ability, which we believe is an ability. It's a learned, it's for the most things, as we know, there are people that are gifted, but most of us are not gifted. And it takes work to get the capability developed in ourselves. We don't come pre-developed. Most of us don't. And that takes practice.
Mm-hmm.
And so we believe that there are certain fundamental capabilities, and it's the first thing we think that's important in this capability, Deirdre, is to be able to figure out how do I function? How do I function well
Yes.
in this increasingly um, rapid, increasingly rapid cycle time change, right? It's a word, a difficult words to combine. And part of it is this element of practice
Mm-hmm.
and teaching yourself to do this so that you teach yourself. And part of what we're saying is, in order to teach yourself this, having a simple framework that we're talking about is part of what helps you. And one of the other things, and you were getting at this a second ago, is that you say sometimes you don't have a week to go through or a month, or as we did when I was working for IBM and involved in strategy, had 3 months to develop a strategy, right? You has to do the market analysis, and then you did, the response, and then so the cycle time for strategy actually took a year from the,
Right.
and uh, we don't have that anymore. We
No.
really don't. I mean, maybe there are things that you have that luxury, but most of the things that you and I deal with and we see, we don't have that luxury. So how do you change that in yourself, right? And it's having the base and knowing that when Drucker talks about this 5-step, you call it a decision process, I think, right?
He's
Uh,
setting out a process. Yes.
and he's trying to articulate for us what are these fundamental things inside a process, the steps that you need to take? And we have our own that matches that talks about the outcome. What is the result you want? What is the outcome of it that you want? But the part of this is needing to make sure you're ready. One is that you have the ability to do this. You have the ability to make these decisions. Another is, and there are two things, and you were getting at this when you talk about at first about making sure you understand the marketplace, the game that's being played. We talked about this yesterday in our first video on this series on the called Assess. It's about good information and having good information as a solid base that
Right.
you keep yourself current on a regular basis, that you don't let that gap happen. So this is where I even say, and I know you take a day off a week if you can and disconnect, but that means your Sundays are more complex in catching up with what you missed on Saturday, right? So, but our point is, and that's a sanity point that we have to get to at some point about maintaining sanity for all of us. But it's making sure that you have a good base of information, because that reduces the element of what I call surprise.
Right.
And the most almost the most difficult thing for anybody to deal with is the element of surprise. So the more of the surprise you can take out of the decision-making process, the more you can expect that you won't have enough time. The more that you can expect you won't have the luxury of taking the 5-step Drucker process or the 5-step strategy discipline process that you and I have created. The fact that you're not surprised, you're pleasantly surprised if you have that time, but you have that fundamental base so that you reduce the element of surprise. And we talked about this about the Middle East, where back, I think it was 6 weeks ago, I laid out what I thought was going to happen, which is pretty much what's happening this very moment. But it's no longer a surprise. It was sort of a situation of, okay, I think we're waiting for it to happen. And I was not the only one saying there. There were a lot of people that have studied that for a long time, and you being one, that could see it happening. We couldn't see it playing out exactly the way it's playing out, but we could see it playing out. That was just to reduce the element of surprise, so that we know. So everything we've been doing is anticipating that's going to throw a wrench. The geopolitical situation is going to throw a wrench. The global economic situation is going to throw a wrench. You've been concerned about the banking markets worldwide, the financial markets worldwide. So we know this, and the fact that we also have been talking about the fact that institutions that we've relied on to do certain things for us are not seeming to react the way we want. By the way, not surprisingly, because when you and I, we don't do that here, but when you and I talk about specific examples so we can take them apart and analyze them, the one you were talking about when we first started earlier this morning, it was about probably not understanding this or knowing how to do this. And as a result, they're not reacting well to this. It's not incompetence. It's just they haven't learned to react to the situation. And you laid out perfectly why they might not have done that. So I've given you plenty of time, Deirdre, to take a breath, probably more time than you wanted. But I wanted to come back to the fact that when we're thinking about this decision process, this deciding what to do, the approach, saying, what resources can I get my hands on? Do I have, and can I get within the time period I need them? What kind of outcome will that allow me to be? And by those resources, we also mean time, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then what kind of outcome will that allow me to achieve based on what kind of risk level I'm willing to apply to it? And we need to go back to that, take outcome now here a little bit. And then what is the plan to achieve this? So at that, I'm going to turn it back over to you and let you take us to the next step.
Okay. I'll start by commenting again on the essential importance of the leader being prepared at all times to react to any situation. You're talking about a leader having good information. It has to be good information across the whole range of things. You and I have worked with entrepreneurs who have good information about the technology they're interested in, which is essential, but then they have no information about the marketplace they think they're going to sell into. So whatever they're starting to develop is not going to work until they step back and take a look at the marketplace and so forth. This is why the question about resources and then the earlier step about assessing has to cover all of the important areas of a business and so forth. Then what you do, I kept thinking as you were talking about the need to be able to pull all of this together. You can't just state the resources. You have to then be aware of them and build them into your setting of the goals, your setting of the outcomes you want to accomplish. Because you can't accomplish goals. You can't accomplish outcomes unless you have the resources to deliver on them. That's why the resources are so important. And we've seen it time again where leaders say, I want to do this, here are my 5 goals. And we're saying, okay, now how are you going to do that? And we get a blank look here. There has to be a direct tie between the resources you have and the outcome. But even more important, there has to be an absolute tie between the outcome you state, the goals you articulate, and the plan of action you put into place. Too many people, again, we've seen this too many times in the entrepreneurs we've worked with and so forth, state the goals and then set out a plan according to what they think they want to do. And we say, fine, but will your plan accomplish your goals? And again, we get a blank stare. They haven't thought to connect the plan they're putting in place and the outcomes they want. And in terms of the topic of this discussion is decide, they haven't coordinated their decisions all the way down the line to make sure they're making the right decisions. As Drucker says, unless your decision leads to action, you've merely stated a good intention. And for too many people, the goals they articulate, the outcomes they articulate, become merely good intentions because the plan they want to follow, what they want to do, has nothing to do with what they've said they want to accomplish. So, this is why it is so important to tie all of these things together, that the leader must be prepared, that the leader makes the good assessment, that the leader makes sure that all motivations across the board are aligned, that the leader recognizes the game being played, so the leader understands what resources that company needs to then put goals into place, state outcomes that can be achieved, and then create the plan so that between assessment and decision, we have alignment, and that the decisions being made throughout the tasks in decision are effective along those lines. Time for me to take a breath again and for you to
Okay.
say some more things.
So the if you're a seasoned CEO or executive, you might have just listened to what Deirdre said and you said, well, that I know that I would never set an objective that I can't achieve. But let me tell you what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is that many times we assume when we put these objectives out there that the conditions will be right to allow us to do it. What you're getting at, Deirdre, is a subtlety that, again, it's funny because we were just talking about this before we started, where we were saying that one person involved in something we know is waiting for the conditions to be right. But they have figured out what happens if they can't be perfect. When is the point at which I'm going to move? Because if I don't, I'm going to suffer other problems. So there are two things going on. And again, this is something that certain professions, you'd see this more than others. We don't see a lot of this in entrepreneurism. We see it outside of entrepreneurism, in probably more in defense activities, I would say, where you'll see condition-based decisions being made in a more complex way. But what we're talking about is those techniques probably need to be thought about for adaptation into what we do every day on the business side, because we need to predict not just what we'd like to do and what we think we have the ability to achieve with the proper resources and the proper time, but also will the conditions be set up properly? What do the conditions have to look like? And how do I judge if they don't develop that way? If they don't develop that way, what does it mean? And what actions could I take that perhaps I should take along the way if conditions aren't going in that direction? So that's the subtlety that we're talking about what we're talking about now, is that when cycle times weren't moving as quickly and things weren't changing as quickly, that affected what we're doing. Clearly, the world has always changed rapidly. It's just whether it had reached the level of affecting what we do in building businesses generally across the board. This is what we're talking about, that figuring out the conditions piece and making sure that we've thought through as part of this question of what do I want the outcome to be? It's not just an aspect of the resources I have available to me, but it's also a matter of risk. But we think about risk in a different way. We think about risk being, first of all, risk gives you a sense of what kind of tolerance am I taking in making a certain outcome my objective? And then what happens if conditions change? How do I now change and look for, and it's not so much a plan B, Deirdre, it's more like my A plan could go like this or like this or like this, and I'm fine with it. Then the B plan is what happens if it doesn't even go in that direction? What do I do? That's a B plan. So we're talking about a fundamentally different way of conceiving of an outcome and managing your way through that outcome. And so we think about risk, and this is why, and we talk about this in how we think about building a business. I promise, Deirdre, I'll take a breath in a second. I can tell you're looking at me here. Either that or you're looking at this Grand Canyon and saying, man, that is beautiful today.
Well,
Right?
it is beautiful.
Yes, it is for this evening. Um, but but anyway, the idea though is that developing that mindset in the way that you think about outcomes is really important. And it's an element we think again is becoming even more important about thinking about when you set these outcomes, how do you figure out this idea of risk and conditions? The last point about risk, it's the reason why you and I have not seen people transition industries easily, right? Because the element of decision making and the element of risk, the risk tolerance many times doesn't equate. That's why coming out of, I'll use the old example, and I'm not even sure this is true anymore, Deirdre, that this is probably a bad example. I will use history. Let's talk about history. That historically, we would say that the most risk averse people were the people in banking and the people that, and when I say banking, I mean traditional banking, meaning retail banking, and the people that were the most risk had the highest risk tolerance were people on the investor side.
Right.
And those were, when you thought about at the very far end, the speculative investors, however you want to manifest that. And that's a pretty wide spectrum, and this
Right.
even historically, but it exists today. Most very large institutions have a low tolerance for risk, and especially governmental institutions. And as a result, it's very difficult for people that have spent a great deal of time in the governmental side to transition easily into high risk entrepreneurial decision making and to be able to not only function there, but be able to guide people in functioning there. So running teams or teaching or whatever. It's difficult to do that. And it becomes really stark for people like you and I that have worked in both groups, right? And I spent a lot of years in governmental institutions and large companies you have too. And then most recently in the entrepreneurial world and built businesses there. And you see it starkly. But making sure that you understand how to incorporate that element of risk in not only your outcome, but also your condition variables as you move along that path of achieving the outcome.
Right. What's critically important, given the time factor, the cycle factor, the risk assessment, the need to identify all of the resources to come up with the effective goals and so forth, is to be able to read situations very clearly and and what Drucker would say along those lines, and I think this is still important, is to understand all of the aspects of your business, but to have ongoing conversations with key people to keep gathering opinions and work through issues even before it's critical that decisions be made. And when it comes down to this, and this is something that you focus on a lot, Tom, is making sure you have the right team around you, whether inside the business or teams of advisors, people who themselves have built their own mindsets and can contribute for their various areas. What's happening? What they think should be done in relation to these areas, where the risks are, what the outcomes can be, and so forth, so that when the leader has to make a decision quickly, the leader can call on resources immediately and say, give me 1, 2, 3 points. And what do I do about them? What do I need? Go out and get this information and let's build this in and be able to work with the different opinions very quickly. To have people you respect around you, people who can contribute. None of this tolerance for someone who is not contributing as well. This is the importance of team. And team is something we've talked about previously, we'll talk about again many times, and so forth. But the idea is that maybe where it is most critically important to move quickly is to be able to assess a situation very quickly, to understand the aspects of a situation, to understand where you can get information, to understand the issues immediately, and then you can move forward very quickly. So that's something we have to build into this. It's not only as an aspect of the time, but an aspect of the risk as well. Unless you develop your ability to read situations clearly and quickly, you're not going to be able to make your decisions clearly. Is this a time to talk about the exercise we've put some of our students through?
Yes, please go
Okay.
ahead.
We teach workshops on judgment, decision making, and negotiation, and we give the students in the room problems to solve, and they're along the lines of, okay, you are a traditional company, you've just been purchased by another company. You received a phone call saying in 5 minutes, your new boss will be in the room and they want to talk with you about how they want to accomplish moving headquarters to another location. This is the first time you, as CEO of the purchased company, have heard this. You know that this would be a disaster. You have 5 minutes to plan how you're going to handle this situation. So this is what we're talking about. And this is not an uncommon situation. This happens all the time. You can pick up the phone and be slammed with something like this. You and I have experienced it ourselves in building businesses and so forth. All of a sudden, something shifts under your feet and you've got to be able to react very quickly. But this is what we're talking about in our overall organizing structure here. It's the ability to assess quickly, including getting the information, understanding the risk, and understanding the options in those 5 minutes. And then being able to know what you say when you step into that room. That is understanding what outcome you want, for what reason, and then how you're going to work toward getting the outcome you want. What plan can you put into place very quickly? Now, in the real world, we've had a little more than 5 minutes, but not necessarily that much more. We've maybe had an hour in a couple of situations, Tom, maybe a day in a couple of the situations. But that's what we're trying to convey to our students. In the digital age, this is how quickly these things happen. And that's why you and I have these very fast, I don't want to call them shortcuts because they actually do encompass everything someone needs, but these short rubrics, I guess that's a good term to use, where we talk about our organizing structure of assess, decide, accomplish. with three things, with our three questions, with our three things we want to do. And we'll talk about accomplish tomorrow to complete our structure here. But that is what we know leaders have to be prepared to deal with. And cycling back to our main focus on navigating the now, is preparing leaders to navigate the now, preparing them to understand what they're facing now and how they can start before there is a crisis, how they can start to prepare themselves to do the work they need to do every day. What are all of the factors involved here? Everything from understanding the game, having your team in place, being prepared to understand what outcomes you can live with, and then being able to understand what resources you have so you can act and make decisions as needed. Another time to take a breath at my end.
So, in the, as most of you know, we use the term students loosely. The last one we had two sitting CEOs and somebody who was a very high level C-level executive. And what we do is this is a long-standing process of doing this is something that I've done with very high level people for a long time. We separate out in these exercises, we separate out the difference between the decision making of what you'd like to accomplish and then the negotiation piece of how do you actually do it. We separate those into two pieces. So you're not trying to do both at first. You're trying to figure one out separately. And sometimes we don't even give you 5 minutes, we give you 3 minutes. And the reason why you do this is that there are times when you'll get a phone call and you'll decide not to take it because you're going to return the call in a moment, but you need to think about what you're going to do. And this is the kind of situation you find yourself in. And in this particular case, we find this universally. The first thing that almost everybody does is think they can get more done in the short period of time they have. And also to figure out how much time do I have in that room once I do get in there, and not to presume you have all the time in the world, because we throw things in like pulling the key person out because they have an important phone call and they never go back.
Right.
So it's all these things in thinking through, okay, who is the person I need to work through? What's the best I can achieve? And what would be then a home run? What would be even better than that? With the time I have and the risk I have and the resources I have. And we see that they overestimate what they can accomplish. That's the first thing. And they overestimate what they can expect to achieve. And also they overestimate what they can get done in the time they have without having done it. And so in an hour, usually with a handful of people, and these are private and we make them fun. We enjoy it. We have a good time. We keep it loose. And it's amazing to see how everybody, once they've done it a couple of times and they've thought about it and they can get very good at this. Now, people that are on the sales side, they do this kind of stuff all the time. They know exactly how to handle it. This is for where we're seeing more and more of our top level people coming out of the tech world or coming out of some element of tech that is not involved in selling or biz dev work. Because that's where a lot of our leaders are coming from these days. And so it's making sure they have the ability to do this. And in fact, the two CEOs we're talking about both come out of the tech side.
That's correct.
They both come out of the tech side. One's a deep programmer, and the other one is more of an architect.
Right.
But an inventor of hardware on the hardware side, an architect on the software, an inventor on the hardware. So, and then the woman we're talking about, the C-level woman, she was the one that just, once she understood the game, even though she's probably the least likely person of all, if you chose personalities, we put her under stress and man, she just relaxed.
Yes.
The more stress, the more she got relaxed. It was not predictable and she did incredibly well. So if you had lined all three of them up, you would have said she's going to have the hardest time, and she did not have a hard time at all.
Right.
And that was fun. From the first moment she understood the game, the first time through, she struggled until she understood what it meant.
Right.
And that she was able to integrate it quicker than anybody, which was it's fun to see when that happens. So I want to get now to Deirdre, we've talked about, the three elements, the three pieces of the framework of when you're faced with having to make a decision in a quick way. It's what resources do I have available to me? What outcome can I expect to achieve with those resources? And how do I judge that outcome and the conditions I need to have to make the outcome work? And then what kind of plan do I put in place? So at this point, if we have 15 minutes left, I'd like to let you take and finish this up for us and head us in the direction of how can people make this useful? You just gave an example of how you can make this useful by thinking your way through these situations and playing them out. That's probably the most important thing, is to think about playing them out for yourself. So as you're facing these, and we can use the example of the person struggling in the swimming pool as a case, because many people say to me, because I've been dealing with this way of teaching this to people for a fairly long period of time, and mostly to adults that are in jobs, right? They're learning to do something at a very high level. And my comment is that this kind of process many times you can do in a second. You have to quickly look. You see, you're walking up the pathway to the community pool that you're involved with, and you see what looks like a child that's struggling in the water. You also see nobody else around. There's only a few people. You quickly glance around. There's no lifeguard. There's nobody that's paying any attention at all. And they don't look like they're going to be the kind of people that'll quickly respond to this. You immediately say, can I kick my shoes off before I jump in, or I'm going to jump in with my shoes on? You've just now gone through, okay, I've looked at the resources. I've surveyed the situation. What am I missing? I'm trying to, is there anybody that's more capable of doing this than me right
Yeah.
there? Number two, are motivations aligned? No, they don't see what's going on. I see it. Maybe as I'm jumping in, I yell, I need help here, right? You yell that as you're jumping in. You and I are both lifeguard trained, so that's different. And, I'm a professional swimmer in the work sense, not in the athletic sense. But anyway, you think through these things, and if you think through them, you can see that doing that and then saying you're comfortable swimming with your shoes on. It's a matter of, can I kick them off in time to get there, or are they the kind of shoes I can't kick off, right? Or can I throw my jacket off, or whatever? Hopefully, it's not that cold. Otherwise, the child shouldn't be in the pool. But anyway, it's a matter of, those conditions do exist, and you don't blindly do that. Most people do go through that process and think, and that's what we're talking about. You are asking the question, am I missing something? What kind of time do I have? And are the motivations aligned? And then you say to yourself, what resources do I have, including time and risk? And then what is the outcome? Somebody's got to do this, because we can't let this continue, and the action has to be now. And so the plan is, but I can yell for help as I'm jumping in.
Yeah.
Right? That's the plan. So that's when we say that, unfortunately, we are facing more and more of these situations. And we can talk about even our university, right? I mean, we had problems at our university that had nothing to do with us. It was the outside influences on the university that have caused the university to have internal problems on the campus itself, and it caused disruptions. And you have to say to yourself, okay, how do you and I do our job under those conditions? What are we going to do? Right? Are we going to walk through that crowd? Are we going to go around? Because it happened to be that they overtook in the building you and I teach in, right? And have taught in for a lot of years, Hamilton Hall at Columbia University. But you will face these things in your life. And it's a matter of now saying, look, I face these things, but now it applies to my job. And how do I now think my way through these things? And it now also applies with how we're going to triage what you and I do tomorrow, later today, this week, next month. And that is the thing that we now have to think about. When you and I started teaching, we were teaching people to do strategic planning, Deirdre, and building 5-year plans. And yes, those are valuable for thinking through, how does a business function?
Right.
And do I understand what it's going to take to make the business function at scale versus at inception? But then it's now a factor of, okay, now that I understand that, how can I now, when I need to shortcut, how can I shortcut? So I'm going to let you have the last 10 minutes or so, Deirdre, to summarize for us.
Right. I think a way I want to approach this is to talk about um, gut instincts versus data-driven decisions. That there's a lot of conversation in the business press right now about the use of data, data analytics, machine learning outcomes, and things like that to feed decision-making processes. All of that's all well and good, but obviously none of the data-driven decision-making processes operate quickly. It takes a long time for people to think through data, to analyze data, to come up with answers, and so forth. Well, meanwhile, the problems have exploded, and you're stuck trying to figure out whether this particular suggestion from an ML algorithm is going to work or not. So, what I think it comes down to again is the preparation of a leader. I always talk about coming back to mindset, and I'm going to use that word multiple times. The way I define mindset is a leader develops a mindset based in knowledge and understanding of the marketplace, competitors, customers, the industry, emerging technologies, business and social factors, and the capabilities of the company. And this is a mindset that is developed from your first day on the job to all through your career over the decades. And at a certain point, you've accumulated the knowledge and the understanding so that you can make decisions very quickly. Your knowledge and understanding turn into instincts. And what we're really talking about, what Drucker is talking about, what other authors that we like and have talked about are talking about, is the leader preparing themselves with development of the mindset, with the building of the team, with the constant monitoring of the marketplace, with the getting input from people, all of which factors into the gut instincts of a leader. A lot of this decision making is not necessarily conscious. It's because you know what's right. You've thought through, and this is another aspect we haven't really talked about. We've thought through the implications, the moral outcomes of situations, whether this is the right decision, whether we as leaders have the courage to act in the way that we know is right. And a lot of leaders these days, unfortunately, and you can see this throughout the business press, do not have the courage to make the right decisions in these things. All of this comes from the preparation that you've taken over the years to build your instincts and to be able to decide quickly and to know the decision is right and to know that you're making the right decision in the situation. Comes down to, can you read the situation? Can you, in the 5 minutes you have before you have to step into a boardroom with your new boss, come to the right decision for the company and explain that decision and know it's the morally correct decision, it's the right judgment for the situation? So that I think that even while, I mean, heaven knows you and I, Tom, are very data driven in terms of the decisions we make, but that's all factored in earlier. We don't wait to the point of having to make a decision to start to look at the data. That's part of our constant building of our mindset. We
Yes.
don't wait for a situation to develop to decide to train ML algorithms to help us sort through the data to provide insights that then we can use to make decisions. That's already been done in anticipation of situations happening. This is us being good leaders, anticipating the game, what can happen in the game, what can happen in the marketplace, what can happen with emerging technologies, with putting in motion the decision-making tools that we have and getting the insights, getting the input, hearing the opinions and the judgments of others so that we ourselves are prepared based on data, based on opinions, based on our own mindset to make the decision that is right at the time we have to make it, because given the time factor, we just aren't going to have time anymore to put tools in motion. They have to have been put in motion already. And with that, I think I'm going to turn the last 2 minutes over to you to sum up. Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Deirdre. I think this gets to a subject that we'll explore in more detail soon. But the concept I think that you're on, Deirdre, is this idea of is the idea of having our machines and our data be our partners and using it as preparation tool and then aiding us as we execute, but not relying on them at the moment.
Correct.
That's the real key. And we have some great examples. I have one that's great that comes from the use in space exploration, the ideas of how you use advanced technologies to partner with humans and under what conditions are they incredibly valuable. So we'll explore that piece. But to come back to our topic of today, it's that topic of deciding what to do once you've assessed the situation. So you've assessed the situation quickly, you've gone through and you've asked yourself the three questions. What am I missing? How are the motivations aligned? And lastly, how much time do what is the element of time? Is it my friend or my enemy? And then turning to now, what do I do? What kind of resources do I have available to me in the period of time I've talked about? What is the outcome and what are the conditions I need for those outcomes? And then that I can expect. And then what's the plan?
Right.
Deirdre, as always, it's a pleasure.